The fastest way I built my 3D portfolio without a job offer. Most 3D artists wait for a studio job or a client before they even start building their portfolio. And that's exactly why they stay stuck. In this video, I'll show you how to build mine without a single job offer and how to do it as well, so you could copy the same formula. Well, we will talk about how I built my 3D portfolio without a single job offer, top 3 reasons why this method works so well, and including how I created my own briefs, and I'll explain what briefs are, how I focus on finished, polished projects, and how sharing my process publicly opened doors I didn't expect. And by the end, exact steps to start building a portfolio. You don't need any permission to do this. You could just start this on your own. So, about me. My name is Dwayne Elahie. I'm a CG supervisor. I work in the industry for 20 plus years. I've been mentoring and teaching for 15 plus years. I taught hundreds of students now who got into the industry, who make 70K plus in salary. I've been at these studios and worked on many projects with many of them. EA Sports, Industrial Lights and Magic, ILM, Pixar, Disney, Sony ImageWorks. And if you look at my IMDb, you see the projects I've worked on, such as the Netflix The Witcher, James Cameron Avatar. I've was the CG rigging supervisor for the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Mutant Mayhem. Worked and done a lot of tools for Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs too. And you could see the other projects that I've worked on or had a hand of working with tools that they still use today. For example, the current K-pop Demon Hunters and Spider-Man Enter the Spider-Verse use a lot of tools that I created while I was working on Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs 2. And as I mentioned, I was a CG supervisor for Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Mutant Mayhem, and other projects I've worked on, Avatar, The Witcher from Netflix, Marvel's Secret Invasion, Hunger Games. So now let's get into the top 3 reasons or things you should look at if you want to build a portfolio that will get you your job, right? So first, number 1, before you even have a job at all, you have to have some type of portfolio. And usually when you work at a studio, you use the work as demonstration for the portfolio. But if you haven't started yet, how do you get that portfolio, or how do you get those assets, right? What I did is I created my own briefs instead of waiting for a studio. Basically, I created my own projects, right? And how do you go about doing that? A lot of times I went to the website of the company I want to work for. I looked at their job description. Then I looked up different artists or different people who worked at those companies who are in those positions. You can find them on LinkedIn, for example, or on their ArtStation or DeviantArt or something like that. And they look at the type of work they've done and try to replicate that quality. So the thing is about this, when you're starting out, you have no recruiter, right? There's not a problem. I gave myself assignments. Again, by looking at the type of projects, what they're looking for, and then try to do very similar projects. I looked at, like I mentioned here, real job postings, turn them into mini projects, right? And when I say mini projects is that sometimes if you look at other people's work, there's a lot of different pieces they have in their portfolio. Always try to take on one, finish that, and then move on to the other. A finished piece is much better than a whole bunch of unfinished pieces, right? This is what this did by having a step-by-step plan. This kept me focused on industry relevant skills instead of random experiments. Why is it industry relevant? Because I went to the websites of the company. They described what they needed. I looked up what the artist did. And then I know exactly that's my benchmark. If the artist is working there and this is what's considered good, if I did something very similar to it, it should be a lot closer. And also, it showed initiative and problem solving, right? Being able to go on your own and take on projects without being told. And that's something studios love, because studios and projects are very creative in the sense of what the end results will be. And a lot of times they know what they want to get, but they don't know exactly how to get there. So you having the initiative to go and actually build them out, that shows that you're self-sufficient. We don't have to handhold you and tell you every single step. We just give you the job, leave you alone, and you get the job done. So like I mentioned before, we're going to explain what are briefs. So like I said, they're like mini projects, but here's an example. In the 3D creative industry, a brief is basically a project description or an assignment. Here's an example of this, right? So think of it like this. In a studio, a supervisor gives you a brief, basically a project description or an assignment. Create a really realistic medieval sword asset for a game in Unreal Engine under 10K polygons with PBR textures, physically based rendering, that types of like shaders, right? So here's an example of what the result will be. So the whip, or the work in progress, this is what you'll see in the viewport as you build it out. This is kind of like what you would show, because the topology and the layout matters. You wanted to make sure it's 10K. You would also, it's not in here, but you would also show the poly count here. And then you'll show the final render of it, right? That will be an example. And when you're creating a brief and you're showing your portfolio, I would actually write out what the brief is, and then you show your work in progress, your whip, in the viewport, and then you show the final render of the result of that. Here's another example. In a school, a teacher gives you a brief, model a character based on this concept art, and render it in Arnold. Arnold is a rendering engine. Of course, it could give you other ones like RenderMan, V-Ray, Cycles if you're using Blender, things like that, or Eevee, whatever the brief is. So here, you're given this concept art most of the time, unless you have to create it, but sometimes you are the artist and maybe you create your own for if you're gonna go and create your own briefs, or you could go on and look at other like concept arts on maybe ArtStation and whatnot, and then take that to replicate this type of workflow. Once you have the concept art, then you'll go and model it out, and you have the wireframe, just like we did with the work in progress for an asset for a sword here. So you go and do the viewport, again, showing the wireframe, the flow of everything, edge flows, why you would have it for deformation. If you're doing the face, there's certain edge flows that you would probably want. And then you would also show like the final render of it, so you actually see aesthetically what it would look like. And this is technically that it will work with the pipeline, and this is artistically what the actual design, what they want as a final, or they envisioned. And this is you manifesting what it actually would look like for the project, right? So that's an example. Here's another example on your own, right? You can make your own briefs, right? For example, I want to create a Pixar style living room scene in Blender. Pixar style, kind of like a known whimsical type style. Blender is a free software you could go and use, so you don't have to break the bank, and creates really high production value. It's again currently a project that was made in Blender, won an Oscar, so it's definitely high quality. And part of the brief, recreate a Pixar style living room scene in Blender, fully lit and textured as if it were for a short film. So that would be the brief. So follow that. Same thing, work in progress. You see in the viewport, you have the wireframe layout. Make sure, try to show that you are conscious of poly count, so it actually renders out and doesn't have such a huge memory footprint, and also clean topology as well. And then this will be kind of like the final style with the warm type of look. If you have a color board as well, you could also get the mood or I guess similar to like cinematography of the final image of that, right? So those are examples of what briefs are, and that what I'm suggesting is when you do projects, go on to websites of companies you want to work for, look for the job description, and create briefs or project description or assignments that are be similar to the style that those studios are doing, right? And again, look up on LinkedIn, see people who are already working at that studio at the role that you're looking for that would do those type of job, and look at their work on ArtStation, DeviantArt. Most likely they're sharing it somewhere, right? Number 2, I focused on finished presentable work, not just whips, work in progress. Like these are work in progress, right? As you work on it, this is what I see in the viewport. This is a work in progress. This is what you see in the viewport, right? And viewport, this is what you see in the viewport, which is fine to post as you're working on it. But if you want to have final finished projects, so you could actually go out and get jobs to show that you know how to get a finished project, right? Because a polished piece speaks louder than 10 half-finished projects. So, for example, you have this. If you have like you made 100 characters, but you only have work in progress like this, right? Showing you do one of these, and they're like, okay, you know how to go from concept art, work in progress, and final. Having one of those in your portfolio is better than having 100 of these, because at the end, this is what you're delivering, right? Same thing with if you're doing environment. So this is character, this is stylized character, which we have a course on. Actually, we have a course, we teach all of these things. But if you're doing, environment, even stylized environment in this case, right? You want to see the final render, the final deliverable. And in this case, this could also be a short film, but it could also be for a game as well with the type of shaders, because they're mentioning, actually it is for a game, Unreal, right? So you want to show an asset that would be displayed for the final deliverable, right? So having, again, 100 of these work in progress doesn't mean anything if this is what they're looking for. This shows you, with the work in progress, at least shows your thought process, and you know what you're doing. And behind the scenes, technically, they're like, okay, you are conscious of making sure that it's 10 polygons, your flow is clean or makes sense, and using the textures that we could use in our engine. That's why you want to show your work in progress, to show your thought process. But this is the deliverable, right? So you have to make sure you show that. And so in these cases, right, the final piece, I prioritize these so they work and look studio ready. The lighting, the presentation, the storytelling. The storytelling part in this context, it means kind of like the brief, right? The brief explains, okay, in, let's say, this over here, the concept art is a model character based on this concept art and rendered in Arnold, right? So that's the story, right? And then the presentation is showing it from the front view, the side view. You might have a 3/4 view. You have a close-up of the face looking at you, and you could even see kind of like the specularity of the light source, and also looking forward. So presentation-wise, at least gives you an idea of what it's supposed to look like. And then at the end, I mentioned the storytelling, and then the lighting. I just talked about that a little bit here. You have specularity here. You have it's lit more lit on the character left side, less on the right side. Not in this case, there's a little bit of, you could see that make like a separation of a blue light. So anyways, it just gives you an idea of what the final look would be in the actual final project. Same thing. This is kind of like a short film, right? Or actually, this is more, a character-based render. This is probably more stylized character, like a feature animation. And this one is more for a game. And this one, again, similar short film, right? Style, right? So it's important to know what your end result is, because what you're doing for a short film will be different than if you're doing it for a game, which will be different if you're doing it for VFX, will be different if you're doing AR, VR, will be different if you're doing product visualization, architectural visualization. So that's why having the brief, knowing before where you start at the constraints, dictates how you went about it and how your work in progress moved towards the end result there, right? And basically doing it this way, this made my portfolio look like I already had a professional experience, right? Because at least you're going through the process, it makes sense, you're getting the results you're looking for, right? And the other thing is I documented and shared the process publicly. Again, I share the breakdowns. So in the past, again, I started this, as I mentioned before, I've been doing this, I've been in the industry for 20 years, and then years prior to that to get prepared to get in the industry. So back then, when we were there, back then it was mainly blogs and WordPress, use forums. YouTube was just starting out. Facebook was just starting out. So a few years later, we used mainly Vimeo because Vimeo had better quality. YouTube is now 4K and all that, so that's not a problem anymore. But now, pretty much the channels, ArtStation, LinkedIn, DeviantArt, Discord, YouTube, and recruiters don't just want the final render. Again, if you just show, going back to this, just this, right? But you're working at a game company, maybe that style is not what they're looking for. Or if you just show this and you're trying to get into a VFX and you're like, okay, this is nice PBR and all that, but we need it to actually look photorealistic right inside a plate or on the footage of the actual, mixed with the actual like actors and whatnot, right? So that's why here, just not showing the final render, showing the storytelling of it, mainly the brief of, you understanding where you're coming from, how you get there, right? This is why you show your process publicly, because you can see the progression of, okay, for example, in this case, I start off with a concept art. You post that, and then the next work in progress, I'm working on the viewport, and maybe started off with the torso, then you have the arms, then the clothes and whatnot. So you see how it's going forward, but you started off explaining what you're going for with the brief. So that's your storytelling part. And then at the end, you show the final results. So this, for the recruiters or people who are hiring, if you're trying to get into a studio for the first time, they love seeing problem-solving skills, because in production, that's mainly what you're getting hired for, to understand not just the final project, but within the constraints and the timelines and the style of what the studio is looking for. And this is, how does this solve a production problem, right? In their pipeline, how are you able to mitigate or work within those constraints, right? And by showing the process and the progress while you're doing it, attracts, well, in my case, like I attracted feedback. People gave feedback, oh, that's cool, but this is another way you could do it. People love to give their opinions, right? Mentorship, people, even maybe people who are where you're applying, and then they might look you up and they're like, oh, you have potential. And those people might, or people are more experienced, might give you, again, some feedback, but maybe some more one-on-one mentorship that will guide you. And opportunities as well. I have in another video explaining that you might not be able to know, let's say, when you're starting out, all the skills to get this final render. Like, for example, they have hair here, right? If this is offline rendering, most likely, depending on the software, in this case, this was not Blender. Okay, this was Arnold, most likely probably, Arnold's in a lot of software, but most likely I'm guessing Maya is the industry standard. So you might be using XGen for that, right? If you're in Blender, you're going to use another hair solution. If this is meant for Unreal, like this, right? You might start off with XGen or Blender's solution for that, but then you'll change them to hair cards, which is basically projecting them onto textures, onto planes, and you have a bunch of planes. The planes meaning like a polygon, a square polygon, or rectangular polygon that just follows along with the hairs. That actually a lot of times are cross section like this. So then when you look at it at different angles, it looks kind of like this, but it's actually just polygons with textures that are rendered out, right? So knowing those skills and processes and showcasing as you get along will help you get a job, but also maybe along the way that people might look at it, they're like, maybe someone who's AR, VR, and they see you got this far, like, hey, that's all the skills you need. We don't need final hair like this. Just the model hair like this is all we need, right? And they might reach out to you and say, hey, can you do that for our project? And that's how you could get different opportunities. And it might not even be for necessarily studios. It could be someone's creating a website and they need assets to put on, or maybe product visualization or something like that. So they see your work and they see the stuff you already put up there is sufficient for their job. They might reach out to you, right? And it happened a lot. I had offers, even before I had any real official job, I did get a lot of opportunities to work on projects for freelance projects and whatnot, which is a route if you can do. You don't necessarily have to go to a studio, right? Build out your own brand if that's what you want to do, which we talked about in another video as well.
Quick heads up for all you 3D artists watching this. If you've been grinding away at tutorials and YouTube videos but still feel stuck, I've got something special for you. I'm hosting a 3D character rapid bootcamp workshop where I'll walk you step by step through the exact skills studios actually hire for. It's not theory. This is the stuff that got me hired and working in the industry. If you want to finally build a portfolio that gets callbacks and interviews, hit the link below and grab your spot. Seats are limited, so if you're serious about going pro, this is your chance.
So if we recap here, I didn't wait for permission or a job offer. I created my own briefs, again, my own projects, right? As I mentioned here, what a brief is, my own project description or assignment, as you can see here, right? And to stay focused, right? I created my own briefs to stay focused and on industry relevant projects. Again, I went to websites, see what the job offers are for that I want to do. I just read the job description, looked at artists and how they did it. And then I created my own briefs. So at least I know that is the benchmark. That's what it's supposed to work, and just make sure so I know it's industry relevant, and make sure I finish that, right here, part 2. I make sure my portfolio showcase finished, polished work. It's better to go in, close that loop, finish it before moving on to the next one, right? I don't have a bunch of not just half done experiments, because that doesn't mean anything. Because if it's half done, you can't, whether it's a client, whether it's a studio or recruiter, they cannot assess if you can actually do the job. You can only assess it if you actually show them you've done something and is up to standard that what they're looking for, right? And again, I shared my journey and process publicly. Back then, as I mentioned before, it was blogs like WordPress, your own websites, you coded forums and Vimeo, but nowadays you can still use these, but ArtStation, LinkedIn, Discord, YouTube, Instagram, things like that, people are looking at, right? And it brought me one, visibility, because you could be the greatest artist in the world or the worst, doesn't really matter. Nobody knows because you're invisible, so nobody knows you exist, right? And not only that, as you put it out there, you get feedback to hear what people are saying about it, where they love it, what they think about it, and you could take that, especially if it's constructive, criticism, and incorporate it for your future work, right? And then it creates opportunities. You can't create an opportunity if you don't create a situation. If you're never in a situation, if you're not visible, opportunities don't just come out of nowhere, right? So that's how you could go about that. So for the next steps, what you could actually do, stop waiting for the perfect job from your favorite studio. Don't wait for a client brief or someone to give you a project to do. Start creating your own, right? Find out what you want to do, create your own brief, and then actually complete it from end to end. Not only that, you also see where you are deficient at and where things you need to work on, right? And how to do this, right? Pick one idea, write out a clear project description for it, just like a real brief, and commit to finishing it, right, from end to end, right? A single polished piece is more powerful than an unfinished one, and it could be the one that gets you noticed, right? So make sure you do that. And bonus tip, right? Don't just upload your work to a portfolio site and, just like ArtStation right, and hope people stumble across it. Actively contextualize your work. Write short breakdowns. Explain your choices. Show before and after progress shot. This makes your portfolio stand out, shows recruiters and clients how you think, not just what you can make, right? And the biggest mistake to avoid waiting for permission. I said is there, but avoid waiting for permission. Don't think I'll build a real portfolio once I get a job or a client. That's the mindset that gets you stuck. People wait in all types of industry. Until I get this job, I will work on those type of projects they want. No, you have to prove your skills before someone hires you or even look at you. That's how you get noticed. So if you want a certain job, work on the type of stuff they're looking for, and then present it to them. It's the only way. By creating your own projects, especially if you haven't started yet, right? And you want to break in. So you have to create your own projects that are on par with them and finish them to a professional level. Again, go on the websites, look at job descriptions for the job you want to do. They'll say what it is. Look up other artists that are already doing that, and then try to replicate these things. And I'll give you a story of a real life scenario that happened to me. I was already working in the studio, and I get a call, which is weird because nobody ever calls me from the studio. I don't even know how they got the number or how to find my extension, but they did. And so I answered the call, and it's someone that claimed that they've went to school with me at some point, which I honestly don't remember. But they're working in the industry, but at the time they're working at another company, in a games company, and I was working in a VFX house. And they wanted to go and work on creature work, because at the time I've already worked on Iron Man, the Iron Man project, the Iron Man IP, and Iron Man movie just came out. That's when Robert Downey Jr. just came out, and that started the whole MCU craze, right? And so everybody wanted to get into VFX at that point. Especially at that time, it's not so much now, but at that time, there's a huge discrepancy between working in games and working in VFX. Now, I mean, with Unreal and whatnot, and you could see all the games on PS5 and PC and whatnot, like how detailed in terms of the work, it's very detailed. You do very similar level of detail that you would do for film, except your end results, how you get about it will be a little different. In games, you have to optimize. In film, go crazier with other techniques and offline stuff, but that's another discussion. Either way, at that time, he wanted to move from games because I believe he was doing just props. That's what usually happens when you first start out. You have to take the initiative to prove yourself to move up. And he wanted to work on, hero characters and creatures for VFX. And I said, okay, well, one, I don't really know you, right? So if for me to go in and take your work and then speak, I worked directly with the lead modeler at that VFX house, right? And at the time I was doing like the articulation and animation stuff, right? So I worked hand in hand with him every day because we had to make sure that the models can actually animate, and we could rig them and articulate them so they could move to animate, right? So anyways, for me to take his work and recommend him, I said, okay, can I have some of your portfolio so I could see? And he says, oh, I don't have anything. I said, well, have you done any of this type of work before? Or have you have anything in your portfolio that shows that level that we'll hire? And he said, no, right? So I said, well, how do you expect for them to look at you or consider you to work on like creature work, photorealistic creature work for VFX if you've never done it at all? Even if you haven't worked at a studio, but at least have done some projects on your own that are on par, that would be comparable, and do all the things that I mentioned here. I don't have a VFX one here, but you read a brief, you show like the concept art, you show your work in progress, and you show the final render. In this case, this is stylized character, but if you're doing creature VFX work, you'll do the same type of process, but at VFX work. So because of that, that's when the biggest mistakes, you have to go and work on real projects for your portfolio for that to work, right? So I'll leave that with you guys. Take that story as you will. Just make sure you work on your stuff.